Picture this. You're 18, broke, and desperate. Then someone offers you a deal that sounds too good to be true. Play the perfect boyfriend to a spoiled rich girl for 5 years, and you'll get a full scholarship to any university in the world. The catch? She's in love with someone else, and you're just a paid actor in her life story. But what happens when the acting becomes real? When 5 years of fake smiles and genuine sacrifice blur the lines between contract and heart? And most importantly, what happens when she realizes what she's lost only after it's gone forever? This is a story of George, a guy who thought he was just playing a role, but ended up rewriting his entire life. Trust me, you're not ready for how this ends. Let me take you back to where it all began. George was a brilliant kid with one massive problem: money. We're talking about the kind of broke where you're washing the same 3 shirts until they're practically see-through, and you're rationing meals like you're in survival mode. His mom was sick, medical bills were piling up, and his dreams of finishing high school seemed about as realistic as winning the lottery. That's when fate knocked on his door. Well, actually, it was a school principal, but you get the idea. Would you be willing to be a companion student? They asked. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. This wasn't about tutoring or friendship. This was about babysitting Willow Lou, the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city, and keeping her away from the wild boy she was obsessed with. Now, let me paint you a picture of Willow. Imagine the most privileged person you've ever met. Then multiply that by 10. Beautiful, talented, and completely untouchable. She played violin like an angel, had more money than she knew what to do with, and was head over heels in love with Makoto, a rebellious rich kid who treated her like she was optional. George's job? Simple. Make Willow forget about Makoto. Get her grades up. Keep the family reputation intact. All while pretending to be madly in love with her. Oh, and do this for 5 years without ever letting her know it was all an act. Anyone with an ounce of self-respect would have walked away. But George? He signed on the dotted line. Because when you're drowning in poverty, pride is a luxury you can't afford. The plan was genius in its simplicity. George would stage a fake bullying incident, collapse at Willow's feet, and spend the next 5 years being her devoted puppy dog. He'd follow her around like a lovesick fool, shower her with attention she didn't want, and slowly, methodically, win her heart. At first, it was painful to watch. George would show up everywhere Willow went, carrying her bags, bringing her gifts, writing her poetry. She treated him like he was invisible at best, and a nuisance at worst. Her friends laughed at him. Her brother Martin actively bullied him. And Willow? She was still texting Makoto, still dreaming about running away to chase some fantasy life with a guy who barely acknowledged her existence. But here's where the story gets interesting. Remember that violin I mentioned? The one that was Willow's most prized possession, a gift from her late mother? Well, the night Makoto finally left for his big adventure overseas, Willow discovered something that shattered her world. At the airport, she saw him holding hands with another girl. 5 years of secret love, gone in an instant. In her rage and heartbreak, she hurled that precious violin into the street, right into traffic. And George, without thinking twice, he dove into the road and saved it, nearly getting himself killed in the process. That was the moment everything changed. Covered in dust, bleeding, but holding her mother's violin safe in his arms, George looked up at her and said, "If it's yours, then it has to be protected." And just like that, Willow's walls came crashing down. George, let's be together. Now here's what makes this story so heartbreaking. George knew exactly how much genuine feeling was behind those words. Spoiler alert, not much. She was rebounding hard from Makoto, and George was a convenient shoulder to cry on. But he didn't care. He had a job to do, money to earn, and a future to secure. What followed were the strangest 5 years you can imagine. On the surface, they looked like the perfect couple. George transformed Willow from a rebellious dropout into a straight-A student. He spent hours tutoring her, dragging her to libraries, filling her desk with workbooks. Her grades shot up from failing to honor roll. He organized romantic dates, bought her flowers, and treated her like a princess. But underneath it all, George was dying inside. Because while he was playing the perfect boyfriend, Willow was still hung up on Makoto. Every time her phone buzzed, Her eyes would light up, hoping it was him. Every conversation somehow circled back to memories of her lost love. And George? He was just there, reliable as sunrise, taking care of everything while being taken for granted. The worst part? George started falling for real. How could he not? 5 years of caring for someone, protecting them, watching them grow and succeed partly because of your sacrifice. That changes a person. But he never forgot the contract. Never forgot that this was business, not love. Then Makoto came back. Picture this. You spent 5 years building a life with someone, thinking maybe, just maybe, they've learned to love you back. Then their first love walks through the door, and suddenly you might as well be furniture. Willow didn't even try to hide it. Her whole face lit up when she saw him. She started canceling dates with George to spend time with Makoto. She'd forget George's name mid-conversation if her phone buzzed with a text. It was like watching someone fall back under a spell they'd never really broken free from. And George? He made a decision that changed everything. The contract was supposed to be over anyway. Makoto was back, Willow was successful, and the Liu family's reputation was intact. Mission accomplished. Time to go. But here's the kicker. He never told Willow about the contract. To her, their 5-year relationship had been real. She had no idea that her devoted boyfriend had been paid to love her. So when George casually suggested they break up over breakfast one morning, her world tilted sideways. "Let's break up," he said, like he was commenting on the weather. Willow was so distracted by texting Makoto that she just nodded and signed the breakup papers without reading them. She probably thought he was just being dramatic, throwing a jealous tantrum that would blow over in a few days. She was wrong. George packed a single suitcase, said goodbye to the only friend who'd stood by him, and disappeared. Just like that. 5 years of shared life, gone without a trace. Now, you might think this is where Willow realizes her mistake and fights to win him back, right? Wrong again. At first, she barely noticed he was gone. She was too busy playing house with Makoto, reliving their childhood memories, and pretending they could pick up where they left off. But life has a funny way of teaching us lessons we don't want to learn. See, Makoto hadn't come back because he suddenly realized he loved Willow. He came back because his overseas adventure had crashed and burned, and he needed a soft place to land while he figured out his next move. And that soft place? It wasn't Willow's heart. It was her family's money and connections. While George had been busy falling genuinely in love, Makoto had been stringing along another girl overseas, a woman named Sophia who'd given up everything for him. And when the Kim family, Sophia's family, found out Makoto was about to get engaged to Willow, they showed up to collect what was owed. The confrontation was brutal. Picture this. Willow's dressed for her engagement party, thinking she's finally getting her fairy tale ending, when suddenly Sophia and her brother Alex storm in demanding justice. Turns out, Makoto had not only broken Sophia's heart repeatedly, he convinced her to have multiple abortions and spent her family's money funding his failed dreams. The scene was chaos. Sophia physically attacked Willow, calling her a homewrecker. Alex threatened the entire family. And Makoto? He chose his own survival over Willow's dreams. He agreed to marry Sophia and become the Kim family's live-in son-in-law, leaving Willow standing there in her engagement dress, abandoned for the second time in her life. That's when it hit her. George would never have done that. George, who she'd treated like a backup plan for 5 years, would have fought for her, would have chosen her, had always chosen her, even when she didn't deserve it. But George was gone. And unlike the movies, he wasn't waiting around the corner hoping she'd realize her mistake. While Willow's world was falling apart, George was rebuilding his life from scratch. He'd gone to London, enrolled in finance courses, and thrown himself into becoming the man he'd always had the potential to be. No more playing second fiddle. No more accepting scraps of affection. He was finally free to chase his own dreams. And he wasn't alone. He'd met Anna, a fellow student who saw him for who he really was, not who he pretended to be. She was brilliant, kind, and most importantly, she chose him first. Not as a consolation prize or a safe backup plan, but as her first choice every single day. Meanwhile, Willow was spiraling. The studio George had designed for her, the one meant to be her fresh start, was falling apart without his careful management. She couldn't handle basic maintenance, negotiations, or even simple decisions. For 5 years, George had been her invisible support system, and without him, she was drowning. She started searching for him desperately, calling every connection she had. But George had vanished completely. Even his best friend, David, refused to give her any information. He'd seen how George had been treated, and he wasn't about to let Willow drag him back into that toxic cycle. Here's where the story gets really heartbreaking. Willow finally found the contract. The papers George had tried to piece together after she'd ripped them up in a fit of rage. And there it was, in black and white. Their entire relationship had been a business transaction. 5 years of what she thought was love had been carefully orchestrated by her father to keep her away from Makoto and on track for success. The realization destroyed her. Every tender moment, every sacrifice George had made, every time she'd taken his devotion for granted, it had all been paid for, or so she thought. Because here's the thing the contract didn't show. George's feelings had become real somewhere along the way. The man who'd signed up for 2 years of fake dating had begged her father to extend the contract again and again just to stay close to her. The money had stopped matching years ago. But by the time Willow figured that out, it was too late. For years passed. For years of Willow trying to rebuild her life, learning to handle her own business, and carrying the weight of regret. She'd throw herself into work during the day and cry herself to sleep at night, haunted by memories of the man who'd loved her when she didn't even know what love looked like. And then, at a business conference she almost didn't attend, she saw him. George had transformed into everything she'd never allowed him to be. Confident, successful, commanding respect from everyone in the room. He was engaged to Anna, building an empire, and living the life he'd always been capable of if he hadn't spent 5 years being her unpaid therapist. The confrontation was brutal. Willow threw herself at him, desperate to explain, to apologize, to somehow turn back time. But George was done. When she asked if he'd ever loved her, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "Never. I wasn't a masochist. Why would I love someone who constantly inflicted emotional abuse on me?" It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that sets people free. The final twist came at George's wedding. Willow showed up, drunk and heartbroken, carrying the violin that had started it all. She wanted to give him one last gift, one final gesture of the love she'd finally learned to recognize. But during the reception, she fell from a garden balcony and seriously injured her leg. By the time she recovered, George and Anna were already on a plane to their new life in America. The last image she had of him was walking away, hand in hand with a woman who'd chosen him first, just like she should have done all those years ago. The story ends where it began, with a violin being destroyed in the street. But this time, there was no one willing to risk everything to save it for her. So what's the moral here? Is it about recognizing love when you have it? About the price of taking someone for granted? Maybe it's about the difference between loving someone and being in love with the idea of them. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just a reminder that everyone has a breaking point. Even the most patient, devoted person will eventually stop fighting for someone who never fought for them. George spent 5 years being Willow's safety net, and she spent 5 years looking past him towards someone who would never catch her. When she finally realized what she'd lost, he'd already learned to live without needing to be caught. The saddest part? They probably could have been perfect together if she'd just seen him sooner. If she'd valued consistency over excitement, depth over drama, genuine care over passionate chaos. But timing in love is everything, and theirs was always just a little bit off. Here's what I want you to think about. How many people in your life are fighting for you while you're fighting for someone else? How many Georges are out there, giving everything they have to people who save their best energy for someone who barely notices they exist? And if you're the Willow in someone's story, if there's someone in your life who shows up, who stays consistent, who puts your needs first while you chase after people who treat you like an option, maybe it's time to look a little closer at what's right in front of you. Because here's the thing about second chances. They're not guaranteed. George gave Willow 5 years of chances, and she used every single one thinking about someone else. By the time she was ready to choose him, he'd already chosen himself. Love isn't just about butterflies and passion and dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's about the person who brings you soup when you're sick, who helps you study for exams you don't want to take, who saves your most precious possessions even when you're throwing them away in anger. Sometimes love looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. And sometimes it looks like walking away when you realize you're pouring from an empty cup into a heart that's already full of someone else. George's story is a reminder that everyone deserves to be someone's first choice, not their backup plan. Everyone deserves to be loved the way they love others. And everyone has a right to stop fighting for people who wouldn't fight for them. The real tragedy isn't that George and Willow didn't end up together. The real tragedy is how long it took her to realize what she had, and how much of his life he spent waiting for her to see it. But here's the beautiful part. George's story didn't end with heartbreak. It ended with him finding someone who valued him from day one, building a life with someone who chose him not because her first choice wasn't available, but because he was her first choice, period. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is losing someone who never really had us in the first place. Sometimes it takes losing everything we thought we wanted to find everything we actually needed. If you're watching this and thinking about someone you've been taking for granted, maybe this is your wake-up call. And if you're watching this as someone who's been giving everything to people who give you scraps in return, maybe this is your permission to walk away and find someone who sees your worth. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve our own honor. Someone who chooses us first, loves us consistently, and builds a life with us instead of just letting us orbit around theirs. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation like this, either as a George or the Willow? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story hit you in the feels like it hit me, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about love. And remember, you're not someone's backup plan. You're someone's first choice. Don't settle for less than that, ever. I'll see you in the next one.